Welcome. This is something I've never done before, but to give you a little peek behind the curtain of what we're doing. Everything we believe in at Be the Stage is creatively leveraging our content as a way to engage and build relationships. So today, what I've done is it's feeding a couple of mouths is what I would like to call it. I would love for you to check in the chat. Let me know you're here. I'm going to do a roll call in a second, but what I've been doing in the last couple conferences that I've been going to is having a show about the people that I met in the conference the following Monday after the conference, right? This is a completely different deployment, right? Like I just went to FinCon, and FinCon is very much my ICP, right? Like what we do serves very, very well for the financial education investment community. And I just so happen to have a keynote that is going on in Redwood City. I'm in the Bay Area right now. I'm in Santa Cruz. So what I'm doing is using this opportunity to do a dress rehearsal of my keynote. And I use that as a way to invite everybody that I met at FinCon to follow up with me, right? So this is just a low friction way to re-engage with people. What I'm doing at CMX is at the end, you're going to see, actually, we can talk about it at the end of the keynote, spoiler alert. But one of the things that we do here with our live shows is it becomes that frictionless follow-up mechanism, right? So this idea that if you're here because you met me at FinCon, I'm like, yo, man, I would love for you. I'm doing a preview of my keynote. Come check it out, right? Like, I know that's what Gabe's here for. And apart from the fact that we became best friends, and that's a very easy thing. Instead of saying like, come watch my shows, like check out my keynote, right? So Madeline is asking, will this and last week's video be sent out to registrants traveling today and travel last week? So I didn't get to see it. Madeline, everything that I do, I then publish 2 weeks later on my podcast and on my YouTube channel. So if you are, I'm going to keep this in on the podcast, right? So if you're listening on the podcast right now, this is just what we did last 2 weeks, two weeks ago on a live show. So that being said, roll call time. Before I get into the keynote, Hannah, so good to see you in the house. The expert on Gen Z and digital natives, right? Everybody should have a digital native in their boardroom. Suzanne Taylor King. Suzanne, great to have you. Another great community builder and a fascinating business mind. Can't recommend her more often. Madeline, so pumped that you're back. We will definitely, if you really want the unfiltered Zoom recording, we can definitely send it to you. Ask Roanne. She is community managing in the chat. We can send you that, or next week you'll see last week's, and in 2 weeks you're going to see this one on either YouTube or podcast. Gabe Walters, every conference that I go to, I make at least one person as a friend that becomes my friend forever. Gabe, you are officially that person this time around for FinCon. So pumped that you're here. And Matt Ward in the house, human referral bacon eater expert. So good to have you here, Matt, as well. And without further ado, I'm going to kick it into, so I have 30 minutes to give this keynote at CMX. This is really the culmination of everything that I have been working on for the last 8 years and how we have iterated through to figure out this way to deploy this mechanism in a very user-friendly fashion that makes sense and dollars and cents, right? So that is kind of like the big thing that community faces all the time. So we have reverse engineered the strategy. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Oh, I love audience participation. I welcome you to make a friend in the chat right now and use the Q&A. Because I am traveling and I don't have a second screen. Don Bates in the house, the Oxford PhD candidate in the flesh. Good to have you, Don. Because I don't have a second screen, I'm only going to have my presentation on me, but pop in any questions that you have while I'm doing it. When I'm done here, I'm going to go straight into Q&A. Roanne's going to invite everybody as panelists so we can see everybody's faces if you want. You don't have to if you don't have your best face on today. And then after that, we're going to kick it into relationship-driven growth strategy sessions. Raj Nathan, startup hype man in the house. I cannot believe he's here. A celebrity, everybody. A LinkedIn rapper, the founder rapper. Good to have you, Raj, man. That's awesome. All right, so I'm going to kick right into this, man. All right, so hook point for this thing is 0 to community in 30 days, a strategy even your CFO would love. No wonder they put me on stage, right? Listen, all you need to know about me is that I had a major aha moment when my brother passed away 8 years ago, and 1,200 people showed up to his funeral. And when that happened, I've had this like weird relationship with the Catholic Church since I'm like 14 years old. And when that happened, I thought to myself, this is not my religion. This is my community. And I can never, ever leave my community. And then shortly thereafter, it hit me that this solves for churn. So there's a business model here. And I have been following those breadcrumbs ever since, to doing it for nonprofits, to selling $60 million projects for construction companies using a similar methodology that I've continued to iterate, to a startup software that we turned around with like no budget, to starting a company based on this methodology. And the thing that I have learned, the thing that has been beaten in me repeatedly, is this idea that everybody wants community, but you're never going to sell it unless you can solve a Monday morning problem. Nobody wakes up on Monday thinking, if I don't have a community tomorrow, my business is gone. They're thinking, I need pipeline. They're thinking, I need to close the deals that exist. They're thinking, I need good marketing in order to do this. They're thinking, how can I get in front of somebody, right? So everything that we've developed has been based on those lessons, a way to inception community on the way while giving somebody the short-term reward. And we cracked it, right? In 2020, I hosted 2 podcasts. One was my own. One was the Not Your Average Investor show for JWB. And though they had very similar inputs, the methodology that we developed for JWB, which is what we call the relationship flywheel, and doing it as an internet talk show, is what led to highly, highly differentiated results. So you see here, about the same amount of episodes. I actually had more downloads and more episodes, right? Mr. Cool over here, but I got 61 emails out of it, 2 clients, and about 65K in 2020. JWB, slightly different story. They had 1,621 emails, a Facebook group of 2,800. This is all just year 1. 259 clients and revenue of 46 million. And it was exactly that, an internet talk show. What we're doing right now, a webinar branded as a talk show, where what we're trying to figure out is what is valuable to our audience, who knows about that value that can provide it, and facilitate conversations online, so that what's happening right now in the chat, even though I can't see it, is people are becoming friends over a Zoom chat that eventually grow relationships. You'll notice that there's folks that come here often and they know each other. They've met each other in person, just like the Not Your Average Investor show community. This was at the end of year 1. We ended up having a fan appreciation show that was like client after client coming on, telling us that this was so valuable to them. They're a part of a community, and this is why they do business with JWB. And shortly thereafter, the first meetup happened in Northern California. This is Jen Filzen. We call her the fairy godmother of the Not Your Average Investor show community. And small meetup, this guy on the left wasn't a client. Shortly thereafter, became a client, right? And then this is fast forward 2 years later, when we actually put a little, continued doing this thing. This is the latest one. 70 people flew into Jacksonville from all over the country for a tour of downtown and to meet the folks that were part of this Zoom call that we all love so much, that we call the Not Your Average Investor show, right? So we built the community, but on the front end, we delivered business results. So I'm just telling you this to let you know that this thing works. And now this is the methodology, right? Like I talk about an internet talk show, but I think of it as a relationship flywheel, and it has 3 core components: value, connections, and content. The idea, what I told you of what is interesting to your folks and who can you put in front of them to facilitate this conversation, that is the co-creation of value together on the show, on your stage, as we like to talk about it. If you're doing that well, and people are showing up and you're having that 3-way conversation, then you get the opportunity to nurture these connections the way that we are doing with each other right now, live. And there's 4 vectors of those connections that you can drive while doing this, which I'll talk about in a second. And then finally is the content piece. This was the thing that when I was doing the nonprofit stuff and the construction stuff, this is what I hadn't cracked yet, right? Content. Content is what scales the relationship building. This magnifies the efforts that you're doing, especially if you're making post-producing content of the people that were on the stage. You know, the more and better that you do that, the better the chances that you end up getting more people on the stage, because the value is obvious, and so on and so on. The relationship flywheel spins. So let's get into it, right? The value, number 1, it's got to be obvious, right? There's 3 things that I want to share with you as far as making the value obvious. One is our concept of content lanes. That is, well, if I'm going to do a show, what am I going to talk about, right? So Content lanes is how we organize that. You think to yourself, the people that I am trying to serve, what do they care about? Right? And if you're honest about it, you're going to realize that, yeah, they care about your product and they care about your service, but that maximum comprises about 20 to 25% of like what they need to be successful in the job to be done that they are hiring for here, right? So what's the rest of it? And then as you start listing those things out, you're going to realize that they fall neatly into certain lanes. For JWB, this is a company that sells turnkey rental property investments in Jacksonville, Florida, right? Like you're buying a home, like you buy a bond or, a cash performing asset. I've bought 3 of them. I'm all in. And if you think about folks that want to do that, right, they're asking themselves, is this interesting? Do I trust these people? And is this thing for me? So what's interesting to them? Real estate education is definitely interesting to them if they're kicking the tires on how to invest in real estate completely passively. So talking about the different types of real estate and the mechanics of it all, that's one content lane, right? All those different pieces. Alternative asset class education is another one, right? So how does this compare to crypto, right? How does this compare to like going on a heater on Robinhood during 2020? True story. How does this compare to gold or any other thing that they may be putting their money into? Where does this fit into that whole portfolio equation? Third, Jacksonville macroeconomy, right? If you're buying a home for Jacksonville for 30 years, you got to know why this is not hairy knuckle Florida. So the things that make Jacksonville unique, that's another content lane. Fourth is in-house expertise, right? Like what would I need to do this myself? And which would tell me then if this is something that I want to outsource, right? So this is a way to highlight their team, highlight the expertise, highlight what they have in-house. That's that 20% pillar. And then the other thing is who else is doing this, right? If you see people like you doing it, then you're more likely to believe that you do it yourself. And those are our 5 content lanes. So when we're looking for guests and we're looking for subjects, we're thinking, man, how can I find somebody that satisfies at least one really well? But if we can satisfy a couple of these content lanes, we can have that conversation, then boom, we're cooking with fire, right? Those are our best performing episodes. Second, positioning. Most people make the mistake when they're starting a show, they think too narrow, right? They're like, how can I make a show, call it like the brand of my company or call it about my service? It's like if I were to start the relationship flywheel show, right? Like, and what ends up happening, it's fine. It's okay for a little while. What ends up happening is that at some point you're going to have all these like great things to talk about and people you have in mind, and then you're going to run out of topics. If you position it too narrow, and if you go wider from there, it's not going to make a lot of sense to the people, from the outside in. From the inside out, you have those folks. But as you get further out from like your inner circle, it's going to make less and less sense. So the key to positioning your show is to name the show after an ideal state, something that the audience is trying to achieve, and something that whoever you're going to have a guest on considers a compliment. Right? That is going to make it very, very easy now. Because when I reach out to folks and I'm like, hey, I want you to be on the B2B Community Builder show, they're like, oh, you think I'm a community builder? That's cool, man. Yeah, I'll come on your show. That's awesome, right? Regardless if it's about storytelling or about content strategy or about community itself or making lightning strike content, right? Like Raj did. And then on top of that, you want the folks that are watching the show to raise their hand and be like, oh, I self-identify as this. This is what I want to be, right? So Not Your Average Investor show worked really, really well because it wasn't the rental property investing show. It wasn't the Jacksonville real estate show. It was a Not Your Average Investor show. And that's created a persona around who our guests see themselves as and who our community sees themselves as. And that, that's allowed us to bring on crypto folks, bring on the mayor of Jacksonville, right? Because we can reverse engineer that story into who they are, as opposed to like, well, like we got a client that's like medical technology, and they named it after like infection control. And as we're trying to have a bigger discussion, folks are just like, well, I don't really know if this is for me because I'm an IT guy. And I'm like, this is exactly who you sell to, but they don't want to come on the show because we haven't casted a wide enough net, right? So you want to cast this wide net where, again, your guest feels it's a compliment. Your audience is like, yep, that's me. And finally, hook points. The number one thing that's going to drive people to your show is not the name of your guest, and it's not who you are or whatever branding, play you're doing. It's what's in it for me, right? Like, what am I going to learn on this call? So what we've realized is that the number one thing is the title of the show needs to be something where your audience, the people that you are trying to serve, get this email. And out of the 500 emails they receive, they look at it and they go, oh, that's something that I've been wanting to learn about. Thank you, Pablo. You just cross something off my list. I'm going to show up on Monday, right? That is what the headline of that email needs to read in order for people to show up. That's the hook point that you are looking for. Brendan Kane taught me this like great hook point exercise, right? Think about yourself walking down a terminal. You're not late for your flight, but you're also not like, you're not dilly-dallying because you want to get there. You look to the left, you see a whole newsstand, and you see a whole bunch of magazines. What headline on that magazine is going to stop you from your tracks, from going to your gate and just chilling to like relax to get on the plane, to walk into that newsstand, grab the one magazine out of 500 magazines and open the front cover, right? Like that's how you got to think about it. Beyond that, the invite, we structure it with an ABT storytelling framework to start. The ABT is like a really modular storytelling framework. It's an and, but, therefore. So in the and, you build consensus. So state of the world is this, and this is where it's going. But you insert conflict, right? But people think it's this, or but this is about to happen. Therefore, this is the conflict resolution. We're going to talk about this thing because it's in your best interest. Then you put in the bio. Then you put in 3 other hook points of the thing that you're going to teach. And that's what brings people to calls. And finally, like a call to action of just like, yeah, come learn live, right? Like give them something for them of why they want to show up, right? So content lanes to keep it organized, what you're talking about, positioning to keep that net wide so that you get guests easily and people self-identify, hook points to get people to show up to the show. Once you got that going on, if you got people showing up to the show, like I have the honor of today, I'm sorry I can't see the chat right now because I don't have another screen. Once you have that going on, now you get this idea of like nurturing for connections. And the key here is to share your stage. This is why we are called Be the Stage, because you want to be the stage, not the star of the stage, right? So first is the host to guests, right? The people that you have on your show, or either your super consumers that you want to get close to, people that are great prospects or great sources of other referrals, or other experts in your field that you want to be guilty by association with, other potential partners that can lead to referrals and partnerships. And in that one, this is the quintessential dinner out, right? Like this is the, hey, what is your superpower? Why are you so good at what you do? How can others learn from that? And who can I introduce you to, right? Like when we onboard folks to the show, we tell them on the front end, our goal here is to make an interview that you feel and look so good in it that you're going to use it as a way to introduce yourself to your next client before you take a meeting, right? And that's the level of service that you want to be at. Because think about it, the more that you appear with great people, the more guilty by association you are. So it behooves you to not turn this into your sales pitch. It behooves you to promote the things that you both believe in the most and set them up to really, really succeed, and keep it to like 80% about them, 20% about you and how this all thing fits in and how, like this makes sense for other people. Then there's host to audience. When people show up, you got to make them feel like you're sharing the stage with them. You do that in 3 different ways. There's 3 different ways that the audience feels like the stage is being shared with them. 1, hearing your name on this thing, right? That's why I do the roll call. That's why normally if I'm seeing the chat, I'm giving people nicknames. I'm adding context to whatever you're saying, and I'm trying to incorporate you into the conversation. You hear your name on the stage, it's being shared with you as well, right? Second, if you have input to give, your input makes it to the stage. Be it that somebody sends me a suggestion of I want to see this topic, or I want to listen to this person and I have him on, give him credit, right? Like give him credit for the idea that it is important to you that the things that your community want to see are there and this person provided it, right? That's going to drive engagement long-term if you allow people to provide their input on the stage. And finally, let them have a path to the stage themselves. Your first super consumer, the person that really buys in on your community, you know what? You're going to work real hard to figure out a way to get them to be president of the Cool Club for the day and interview them. On the Not Your Average Investor Show, it was Lee Bishop, who's in the house. We call him the MVP of the Not Your Average Investor community. The moment that we realized he's our biggest cheerleader, we figured out a way to have him as a guest. On this show, Dawn is a great supporter of mine, figured out a way to have her on here, right? Like that is, you want to have a path from community member to on the stage for the day. If you provide enough value, that drives engagement as well. Then there's guest to audience. These are the 2 vectors that people really start to miss, even when they don't do this host to audience stuff. And it's guest to audience. When somebody asks a question and you are relaying it to your guest, try to add as much context as you can to the question for 2 reasons. 1, hearing your name on the stage, right? If I'm phrasing a question that I asked the expert as a warm introduction to somebody. It makes you feel like you belong there. It makes you feel like this is a conversation between three friends. This is why you show up, so that you can talk to the guest and be friends with Eddie Yoon for the day, or Christopher Lockhead, or whatever. And then second, and this is what people miss a lot, is you're doing a favor to your guest. The more context that you give him when they ask, or her, when you're asking that question, the better you set them up to succeed, to provide a valuable answer, right? So you're really just facilitating this exchange of value, which is at the end of the day, the key to community building. And then finally is audience to audience, right? Like incentivize thought leadership inside the comments, inside the chat. When somebody says something, call it out. That's a great thing by Hannah. I'm sure she's typing something awesome in the chat at some point here. I can't see it, but like drive those connections, because really what ends up driving that community piece is people feeling like they've made a friend in here, and it's become appointment television, and you get to see them and interact with them. And then when you give them the option to meet in person, they do, right? So that is what those four connections is what really starts to drive the community and really just ramps up the value and the relationship building during the live show. And then finally, repurposed content creates the scale, right? Like this is 2017. I wouldn't shut up about this whole like community creation, aggregated value. I didn't know how to crack it beyond like the city where I lived. And then I saw our boy Gary V, and the rest is history, right? Like you can take whatever you're doing, you can take the one seed of an interaction, and if you're making content around it, then you take that seed, you plant it in 20 different pots, and you put it in 6 different ecosystems, right? So the key to that is to create a process for speed. The process for speed we created has, I believe it's 5 junctures, right? So you take a video, you transcribe it. From the transcription, you highlight the things that you think are the most compelling, that you want quote cards and videos made out of. From there, it goes to your video editor, graphic designer, right? That's way more efficient than, second 4-minute 32 to 7-minute 24. No, it's a 26, right? Like that. It just completely takes away that whole back and forth. If you're transcribing and highlighting and sending it to a graphic designer, video editor, makes it way easier. Once the video editor chops it up, they put it back in something called a batch board, right? And this is just a sheet that has a couple of tables, and every table is for one piece of content. That piece of content has a link to the content, then it has a place for a headline, and it has a place for a caption. That way, once all these things are figured out, then you can write in headline, write in caption, write in headline, write in caption. This becomes the role of the writer, so that you can start scaling this process out. After that's done, back to the graphic designer, put it together with the headline and the teaser, and then it goes to social media scheduler, right? So what happens when you separate it out into these steps is that, you might be a one-person team, and maybe like me, when I first started, you were doing all the steps except for the video editing and graphic design. But as time goes on, you hire a social media scheduler, and you hire a writer, and you hire a content selector, a content strategist, right? Like I now get to do this stuff, and it just goes, because I have all the people that are in every different spot. But if we wouldn't have like segmented it out, then we would have never gotten to that point where we could. And kudos to Isar, who has built the most unbelievable content repurposing strategy through the script. So if you're not using the script, highly recommend that, because it can do like 3 of those steps in one. And if you need it, we can send you the YouTube of Isar's keynote of how to do that in the chat. All right. So then the content you create has to be thumb-stopping content, right? We are scrolling the length of the Eiffel Tower every single day on our phones. So in order for someone to get to that really cool thing you say in minute 133, they got to stop and pay attention. So you get 3 chances to get them to stop their scroll. We call these the hooks, right? There's the first line of the copy, there's the headline, and then there's the first 3 seconds of the video. I'm going to go in backwards order of how you got to think about this, right? So again, if the money shot is in minute 133, right? And like, let's say Not Your Average Investor show, it's like, yeah, and that's when I made $6 million off of rental property investing from 0 in 5 years. You put that directly at the front of the video, and then the brand comes in, and then the story starts, right? So that's the first hook. Headline then becomes, I never thought it was possible to get rich in 5 years, right? Or like the headline can be surprising way to build wealth from nothing in 5 years, right? So now that's framed, right? Somebody's seeing that, they see that first part, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. And if you magnify it from the first line of the copy in the caption, I like to think to myself, I never thought I would say this, but, and then that's what I start my caption with. So in this example, it would be like, I think I'm going to be a millionaire in 6 years. right? Because I'm going to reverse engineer the strategy, and what this strategy is blah, 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 blah. But that's the first line, right? So now someone sees, I think I'm going to be a millionaire in 6 years. You never believe how quickly you can make capital. And then this person says, I made $6 million of real estate in 5 years. Boom. Now you're like, wow, I got to figure out what this is, right? I'm in for the story. So yeah, so those are the hooks. Finally, I like to think of the reason why we do this on Zoom is for a couple of different reasons, right? Like, I get the question all the time, why can't I just go restream and do like YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and all these different things? At the end of the day, at my core, I am a kid that grew up in Miami in the 90s promoting nightclubs. And there is nothing more powerful in social validation than the cool club, than the velvet rope, right? So like, you want to create an intimate environment where people feel like they're in the inside of something. And that's what this Zoom chat creates. Not to mention the fact that to get on a Zoom call, people have to give you their information. So now you're also building a list off of this thing. And the way that you treat it is, president of the cool club is on the stage. The cool club court is right here in Zoom right now. This is where we're building relationships. Next level out is, if you're live on Facebook, if you're live watching somewhere else, like you can interact with them, but they know that they're not here. So they have to opt in order to really be in. And then the outer levels is just people that are following along, that the day that they want to join in, they're able to join, right? Like, that psychology is what frictionless nurture is what we call it, right? Going from like periphery of content consumption to center of the cool club. You're in here with me, buddy. Let's go, right? And then finally, Q&A, right? We talk about sharing the stage, and one of the reasons why you add all the context in the questions of the Q&A and then you repurpose that content strategically is because you're sharing the stage, right? If I can tag the guest for this awesome answer that he gave or she gave, if I can tag the audience member for this awesome question that she answered and then share it, now that has legs to grow organically, right? So this is what we implemented at JWB. Year one led to $40 million, but I haven't told you why I think this is something your CFO is going to love, right? And we didn't figure that out until Greg Cohen, who is the CMO and co-founder of JWB, came on Easter's podcast, and he realized something really, really important. And it was that these $40 million worth of revenue and all this value and all this community, really, he could trace it all back to the 30 people that were showing up to every show, right? So like, little context, we do 2 shows a week with JWB. We get like 45 to 65 people on per show. So it's like 100 to 120 people, but there's about 30 that come to every single show. And that is the heart of our community. And when he traced back all the profit that came from this, it was them re-upping and buying more properties, them telling their friends and other people in the community about it, them convincing somebody that wasn't so sure about it, taking a call and just talk, right? Like Lee Bishop does a ton of this, like taking a call and just talking them through the minutia with somebody that isn't selling them anything, right? So this idea that with only 15 to 30 people, you can have a valuable community that generates revenue seems really, really approachable, doesn't it? And it makes perfect sense because it's really just a game of social validation, right? Once you get to 15, then person 16 through 500, once they land on the show and they realize, I'm here to figure out if this person's real, right? And they see a bunch of people that like are clearly real, talking about how much they're into it. That is the pipeline accelerator. That is the social validation piece that Eddie Yoon calls the most powerful way of acquiring clients, which is to have 2 super consumers talking about your product in front of somebody who is debating whether or not they want to be a client, right? So if that's the goal, right? Like if where we need to get is this like 15 to 30 people showing up to every show, how can we shortcut that? And what we came up with was a cohort-based course, right? Because a cohort-based course has the things that create community, right? This like shared mission, this idea that you're going to take people on a journey together to accomplish a goal that they all care about, that they're all, like-minded folks, right? That it has that. We add an office hours element to it, right? So it has the ritualistic approach of you're going to show up to this course once a week. There's going to be office hours once a week, whichever time slot that fits the best. That's when you start doing your live show because you've indoctrinated people into showing up at a certain day, at a certain time to get value. And that shortcuts it. And number 3, which is the reason why It is a strategy that your CFO will love, is the idea that it provides cash flow, right? So if you can sell 25 $500 cohort-based courses 10 times, right? So like 10 months out of the year, let's say you have a 4-week program, you're selling 25 of them for $500. Guess what? You just generated $150,000 on the front end, right? So would that not pay for your community program? It's also, if you think about it creatively, right? Like there's 2 ways to develop it. You can either figure out what you can really, really teach your community that they're going to want to pay for, or you can, if you have like a product, like a software, you can go to all your super users and bring them in for, and I did this in 2018, right? Like we had this like e-commerce software. We brought in our 12 highest performing clients. I gave them a template to present their business, and I did a SWOT analysis for everybody. And when they presented it, we realized that each person was really good at one thing. And then we took that one thing from each person and turned it into a course, and we credited them for it, right? And we sold that course for $5,000 a pop. So now you are giving them, this like elevated level of expertise. And oh, guess what? If you take this course in 6 months, we're going to have an event where they're going to be the speaker and you can come meet them. Right. So the cohort-based course is this way to liquidate it on the front end, to create the Avengers, whether you're doing it from the people teaching it or the folks that are taking the course and getting like habitualized to showing up at a certain day on a certain time. And you are financing your operation on the front end that builds a community that does all this other stuff. So the rest is bonus. This is why your CFO will love it. So of course, we eat our own dog food around here, and we completely re-engineered everything we did. We launched a online cohort-based course that started selling it at 200, and we sold it at 500. Now we're selling at, this is actually a little bit outpaced. There's only 1 slot left at 747, but anybody from this call, if you want it at 747, that's easy. So we launched this course. We're about to do cohort 3. It has generated revenue from us from the front end, but more importantly, it got really great people showing up to my show and building that flywheel piece that allows for that social validation to happen, all by just given the best advice that you have for a price that is a no-brainer. We give away all of our frameworks. We give away, like our SOPs, everything, plus all the thought process, blah, 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 community, all put together, everything you need. And then we also ate our own dog food, right? And this is, we rebranded the show. If you saw it before, it was the Chief Executive Connector show. That was about me. Now we call it the B2B Community Builder Show. We have content lanes. People that we bring on the show are like, oh yeah, I'm a community builder. I'm cool. That people that raise their hand to come on this want a community, right? And this has been the result, right? Remember 2020, it was like $60,000 worth in profit. Well, in 6 months of doing this, we've had 266 attendees, 34 campers, 6 new shows have launched. That's huge, right? Because there's now 6 people out there in the ecosystem evangelizing this thing and doing this thing and allowing it to get better and better based on what they're doing. And we've secured $202,000 worth of new business. That has come from 3 different things. One is, now that I have a show, I'm able to bring, we have one client that we brought on that was like, we did a 2-part series. He realized that like he wanted his clients to be in the audience, being a part of this. So, signed up for like the full service. We had another client that we invited him in the audience, and he realized that like, man, he wants his clients in the audience, full service. And then we had a graduate from the boot camp that decided there was so much value in it that she wanted to invest in the full service done for her as well. And on top of that, the people that have bought the boot camp, right? So this is it. This is the formula, right? If you're trying to grow a community, or you're trying to convince your boss to grow a community, make it easy for them to adopt it by solving the problem on the front end. The Internet Talk Show solves for content creation, strategic relationship building, and engagement of community. Creating the online cohort-based class creates for liquidating it on the front end and shortcutting to the people that need to be there to show that it's a community and not just a bunch of crickets. And last but not least, since this is going to happen at CMX, this is my move. This is what I was teasing ahead of time. Come be a guest on my show, CMX audience, right? Like I want folks from CMX. My next show on Monday is going to be the lessons that I've learned from CMX. It's going to be, you can come on, give me like a 5 to 6 minute speaking point of what you learned. We're going to post produce it, give you content to position you as an expert in your field of community because you were there. And I get a crowdsourced show. I get to learn all the stuff that I didn't learn because I'm out there making friends instead of like watching the programming. But more importantly, this is an unbelievable feedback loop mechanism to be able to invite somebody when you go to a conference, invite them on your show immediately after. It like formalizes the relationship. It gets them on your email list. And now you get to show up and give value whenever you want. We did this for the first time at, what was it? It was at Podfest. We did this and it worked really, really well. I'm now doing it at CMX. I'm going to do it at the Badass Business Summit. And today's the first time that I ever did a different deployment, right? I was at FinCon and I was like, man, I got this keynote coming up. I'm going to give a preview of it. This is what I'm talking about. Come check it out. And people can come opt in and check it out.